My name is Marcus Chen, and I'm 31 years old. Standing in the parking lot of Riverside Memorial Hospital in Portland, Oregon, staring at my phone with trembling hands. The text message from my sister glows on the screen like an accusation. Dad's estate is finally settled. We got everything. Thanks for making it easy. I read it 3 times, each word sinking deeper like a stone into dark water. My father has been dead for 6 months, and I'm just now understanding that I was never meant to inherit anything at all. This isn't a story about grief, though there's plenty of that. This is about the moment I discovered my family had been planning my erasure for years, and how I fought back in the only way I knew how. With the truth, I grew up in a suburb outside Portland called Beaverton, in a house that looked perfect from the outside. My father, Thomas Chen, was a commercial real estate developer who built strip malls and office complexes across the Pacific Northwest. My mother, Patricia, managed his finances with ruthless efficiency. Together they built an empire worth nearly $12 million. My sister, Vivian, 4 years older than me, was groomed from childhood to take over the family business. She studied business at Stanford, married a corporate lawyer named Derek Ashford, and moved into a mansion in West Lynn that my father bought for her as a wedding gift. I was different. I didn't want shopping centers or profit margins. I wanted to help people. From the time I was 15, volunteering at a local free clinic, I knew I wanted to be a doctor. My father called it a waste of my potential. Doctors work for money, Marcus. Developers make money work for them, he'd say, his voice heavy with disappointment. But I didn't care. I studied biology, got into medical school at Oregon Health and Science University, and poured myself into becoming the physician I dreamed of being. The rift between us grew wider each year. My father stopped asking about my studies. My mother stopped calling, except on holidays. Vivian and Derek treated me like an eccentric relative they tolerated at family gatherings. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was building my own life, my own meaning. But the truth was, their indifference carved hollows in me that I didn't want to acknowledge. The only person who understood was my father's younger brother, Uncle Raymond. He lived in a modest apartment in southeast Portland, working as a high school history teacher. He'd been estranged from my father for over 2 decades after refusing to join the family business. Your dad can't understand people who want something other than money, Raymond told me once over coffee. Don't let him make you feel small for having a soul. Raymond became my refuge. We'd meet for dinner, talk about books and ideas, and he'd tell me stories about my father before wealth hardened him into something cold and calculating. He used to want to be an architect, Raymond said. He wanted to design beautiful buildings that made people feel something. But somewhere along the way, he decided beauty was unprofitable. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning in March. I was finishing my residency, working a brutal 30-hour shift in the emergency department, when my phone rang. It was my mother, her voice strangely flat. Marcus, your father had a massive heart attack. He's at Providence, Portland. You should come. I ran. I literally ran through the hospital corridors, my heart hammering, still in my scrubs with someone else's blood on my sleeve. When I burst into the ICU waiting room, my mother and Vivian were there, both composed, both dry-eyed. Derek stood behind Vivian with his hand on her shoulder like a political advisor managing a crisis. Where is he? I gasped. Can I see him? My mother looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. He's stable. They're running tests. You should go home and rest. Marcus, you look terrible. I want to see him. Not right now, Vivian said, her voice sharp. The doctors said immediate family only. I stared at her. I am immediate family. I'm his son. You know what she means, Derek said. People who actually matter to him. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, speechless, as they turned away from me and went back to their quiet conversation. A nurse I'd worked with saw me standing there and touched my arm gently. Dr. Chen, are you okay? I wasn't okay. I left the hospital and drove to Uncle Raymond's apartment, where I sat on his worn couch and told him everything. He listened, his face growing darker with each word. Marcus, I need to tell you something, he said finally. Your father changed his will 6 months ago. I heard about it from a mutual friend who works at his law firm. He's leaving everything to Vivian. What do you mean everything? I mean you're not in the will at all. You've been written out completely. The room spun. That's not possible. Even if he's disappointed in me, I'm still his son. There are laws, not if you're deliberately excluded. Not if the will specifically states you're being Raymond leaned forward. Marcus, I think he's been planning this for a while. I think this heart attack just accelerated his timeline. I didn't believe him. I couldn't. Surely, my father, despite everything, wouldn't erase me completely. Surely there was some mistake, some misunderstanding. I spent the next 3 days trying to see my father in the hospital, but I was blocked at every turn. My mother claimed he was too weak for visitors. Vivian said he'd specifically asked not to see me. The nursing staff, following family instructions, turned me away. On the 4th day, my father died. I learned about it from a text message from my mother, the same way you might inform someone about a cancelled appointment. Your father passed this morning. Funeral arrangements to follow. I sat in my tiny studio apartment, the one I could barely afford on a resident's salary, and felt something break inside me. Not grief, not yet. Something darker. A realization that I had spent my entire life loving people who saw me as disposable. The funeral was held at a prestigious church in downtown Portland, the kind of place where wealthy families displayed their grief like expensive jewelry. I arrived alone, wearing the only suit I owned. A cheap thing from Target that looked shabby next to the designer clothing everyone else wore. My mother barely acknowledged me. Vivian ignored me completely. Derek smirked when he saw me, as if my presence was amusing. Uncle Raymond found me standing alone in the back of the church. "I'm going to sit with you," he said. "You shouldn't be alone today." During the service, I listened to Vivian's eulogy about what a wonderful father Thomas Chen had been, how he'd taught her everything about business and life, how his legacy would live on through her. She didn't mention me once. It was as if I'd never existed, as if my 31 years as Thomas Chen's son was simply an inconvenient footnote in the family history. After the burial, there was a reception at a country club overlooking the Columbia River. I didn't want to go, but Raymond convinced me. "You have a right to be there," he said. "Don't let them erase you." At the reception, I overheard my mother talking to a group of her friends. "Yes, it's such a tragedy, but at least Thomas had the foresight to ensure the business stays in capable hands. Vivian will do wonderfully. She has his mind for these things." One of the women asked, "And your son Marcus, what will he do?" My mother's expression didn't change. "Marcus made his choices. He'll be fine. He's a doctor now, apparently." Apparently, as if she wasn't sure. As if my decade of studying and training was something she'd heard about secondhand. I found Uncle Raymond smoking on the terrace, his face gray with anger. "I just talked to Bill Henderson, your father's estate attorney. He's here, the guy with the silver hair. Marcus, it's worse than I thought. Your father didn't just exclude you from the will. He included a clause specifically stating you were to receive nothing because you rejected the family's values and priorities. He put that in writing. In writing, notarized, witnessed. He wanted to make sure everyone knew you were being cut off deliberately, not accidentally." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not hurt anymore, but clarity. My father hadn't just been disappointed in me. He'd hated me for not being what he wanted, and he'd used his death as a final punishment. "There's more," Raymond said. "The entire estate, everything, is going to Vivian and Derek. The house, the business, the investment accounts, everything. Your mother gets a trust fund that Vivian controls. You get nothing. How much is it worth? $11.8 million, plus the real estate holdings. Close to $15 million total." I leaned against the terrace railing, looking out at the river. $15 million. An amount of money that could have paid off my medical school debt, set me up in practice, allowed me to open a clinic for underserved communities like I'd always dreamed, gone given entirely to my sister, who already lived in a mansion and married wealth. "Can I contest it?" I asked. Raymond shook his head. "I already asked Bill. In Oregon, parents can disinherit adult children for any reason as long as it's explicit in the will. You'd have to prove he wasn't of sound mind when he made it, or that he was coerced. Good luck proving that about a man who just successfully ran a multi-million-dollar business." I stayed at that reception for another hour, watching my family celebrate my father's life and their windfall. Vivian and Derek held court like royalty, accepting condolences and congratulations. My mother floated through the crowd, playing the gracious widow. No one talked to me. No one acknowledged me. I was a ghost at my own father's funeral. When I finally left, Uncle Raymond walked me to my car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic with a dented bumper. "Marcus, I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear today." "It's fine," I said, though it wasn't fine. Nothing was fine. "If you need anything, anything at all, call me." "I mean it." I nodded, got in my car and drove back to my studio apartment. I sat there in the dark, still wearing my cheap Target suit, and thought about my life. I was $300,000 in debt from medical school. I worked 80-hour weeks for a salary that barely covered rent and student loan payments. I had no savings, no safety net, and a family that had just declared in legal terms that I was worth nothing to them. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to quietly disappear like they wanted. If my father had written his contempt for me into his will, then I was going to write my own story, and the world was going to hear it. The next morning I called in sick to the hospital for the first time in my residency. Then I started digging. I went to Uncle Raymond's apartment with my laptop and a notebook, and we began researching everything we could find about my father's business, his finances, his will, his relationships. Raymond had kept newspaper clippings about my father over the years, articles about his business deals, his properties, his public appearances. "What are you looking for?" Raymond asked. "I don't know yet, but if Dad was ruthless enough to write me out of his will, he was ruthless enough to cut corners elsewhere. I want to know where the money really came from." We found it 3 days later. A series of articles from 15 years ago about a controversial development project in East Portland. My father had bought several blocks of low-income housing, evicted the residents, and built a luxury shopping complex. The community had protested. There had been lawsuits. Families had been displaced. One elderly woman, Dolores Martinez, had lived in the same apartment for 43 years before my father's company forced her out. She died 6 months later in a shelter, her death attributed to the stress of losing her home. I read the articles with growing horror. This was how my father had made his fortune. By destroying communities, by displacing vulnerable people. I kept digging and found more. A development in Gresham where he'd knowingly built on contaminated land and lied about environmental reports. A deal in Hillsborough where he'd partnered with a company later investigated for money laundering. My father's empire wasn't just built on ambition. It was built on exploitation, deception, and human suffering. Why didn't anyone stop him? I asked Raymond. Because he was rich and connected. Because people like your father know how to stay just on the legal side of illegal. Because the system protects wealth more than it protects people. I thought about Dolores Martinez, about the families displaced, about the communities destroyed, and I thought about my father's will, his final act of cruelty toward me. "I'm going to expose him," I said. "Marcus, think about this carefully. If you go public with this, your family will destroy you. They already have." I started writing that night. I created a blog called The Price of Inheritance and began posting everything I'd found. The articles about the evictions, the environmental violations, the questionable business partnerships. I wrote about my father's death, about being excluded from his funeral, about the will that erased me. I wrote about what it meant to be the son of a man who valued money more than people, who'd rather destroy his own child than accept him as he was. The blog went viral within a week. Local news outlets picked up the story. Reporters started calling me, wanting interviews. Suddenly, Thomas Chen's legacy wasn't just about successful business deals, it was about the human cost of those deals. Organizations that had been fighting against predatory development practices reached out, thanking me for shining a light on tactics that had harmed their communities. My mother called me, furious. "How dare you drag your father's name through the mud? How dare you embarrass this family? Is any of it untrue?" I asked. She hung up. Vivian sent me threatening texts. "You're going to regret this. We'll sue you for defamation." "You can't defame someone with the truth," I replied. "And I have documentation for everything." Derek, the corporate lawyer, tried a different approach. He called me and spoke in a smooth, condescending voice. "Marcus, I understand you're hurt about the will, but this is inappropriate. If you stop this campaign against your father's memory, perhaps we can arrange a small settlement, say $50,000, just to help with your debts. I don't want your money." "Everyone wants money, Marcus. That's how the world works." "Then you don't understand the world as well as you think you do." I hung up on him and went back to writing. I posted about my medical school experience, about choosing a career in service over wealth. I wrote about the patients I'd treated in the emergency room, people who couldn't afford basic health care, who delayed treatment because they were terrified of medical bills. I wrote about the elderly woman I'd met who reminded me of Dolores Martinez, who'd been priced out of her neighborhood by luxury developments and now lived in a single room, afraid and alone. The responses were overwhelming. Thousands of people shared their own stories of being displaced by developers, of communities destroyed by gentrification, of family members who'd valued money over love. I realized my father's story wasn't unique. It was a pattern, a system, and I'd accidentally become a voice for people who'd been silenced. 3 months after my father's death, I was invited to speak at a community organizing conference in Portland. Standing on that stage, looking out at faces of people who'd been fighting against predatory development for years, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: purpose. "My name is Marcus Chen," I began, "and my father was a man who destroyed communities to build his fortune. I'm here to tell you that you're not alone in fighting back. I'm here to tell you that people like my father only have power because we're too afraid or too tired to resist. I'm here to say that I'm done being afraid." The applause was thunderous. After the speech, a woman approached me. She was in her 70s, small and fierce, with silver hair and determined eyes. "Dr. Chen, my name is Rosa Delgado. I lost my home to your father's development in East Portland 20 years ago. I've been fighting developers ever since. I'm so sorry for what he did to you. Don't apologize for him. Just keep telling the truth." She gripped my hand tightly. "You're doing what he should have done. You're choosing people over profit. That takes more courage than building 100 shopping malls." Her words stayed with me as I continued my residency, as I kept writing and speaking, as my family's fury grew more intense. Vivian and Derek hired a PR firm to try to control the narrative, putting out statements about my father's charitable work and community contributions. My mother gave interviews to business magazines, painting me as a bitter, troubled son seeking attention, but the truth was louder than their spin. Journalists kept digging and found more evidence of my father's questionable practices. A lawsuit filed by former employees alleging wage theft, environmental fines that had been quietly settled, a pattern of predatory behavior that had enriched him while harming countless others. Uncle Raymond stood by me through all of it. "Your father and I stopped speaking because I couldn't stomach what he'd become," he told me over dinner one night. "I'm proud of you for having the courage I didn't have, for speaking up while it still matters. Did you ever regret not fighting him?" "Every day, but I was afraid of losing my family. I thought staying silent would preserve something." He smiled sadly. "But you can't preserve relationships built on lies and cruelty. You can only preserve the truth." The breaking point came 6 months after my father's death. An investigative journalist named Sarah Kim contacted me with explosive information. She'd been researching a development project my father had started 5 years ago but never completed. A luxury condominium tower in northwest Portland. The project had failed because my father had secured financing through fraudulent means, inflating property values and hiding environmental issues. "The thing is," Sarah explained over coffee, "he didn't act alone. Your sister Vivian was the project manager, and Derek helped structure the financing. They're as complicit as he was." "Can you prove it?" "I have emails, financial documents, testimony from a whistleblower who worked in their office, but I need someone to go on record about the family dynamics, about whether this behavior was pattern or aberration." I spent a sleepless night weighing my options. This wasn't just about my father anymore. This was about Vivian and Derek, about exposing their corruption to. Part of me hesitated. Despite everything, Vivian was still my sister. Despite the cruelty, she was family. Then I remembered Dolores Martinez dying in a shelter after losing her home. I remembered Rosa Delgado's fierce grip on my hand, her insistence that I keep telling the truth. I remembered all the people my father and sister had harmed in their pursuit of wealth. I called Sarah back. I'll tell you everything." The article ran on the front page of the Oregonian with the headline, "Chen Development Empire Built on Fraud and Deception. Daughter Continues Father's Legacy." Sarah had done meticulous work, documenting years of financial misconduct, environmental violations, and predatory business practices. My interview was featured prominently, providing the insider perspective that made the story devastating. My sister learned from the best. I was quoted as saying, "She learned that people are expendable, that communities don't matter, that wealth justifies any cruelty. She learned those lessons so well that she helped my father write me out of his will, because in their world, family means nothing compared to money." The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Federal investigators opened a probe into Chen Development's financial practices. The Oregon Department of Environmental Quality launched its own investigation into the failed condominium project. Business partners began distancing themselves. Investors demanded answers. Vivian called me for the first time since our father's funeral. "You destroyed us," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "You destroyed the entire family legacy." I exposed the truth. "If that destroyed you, it's because you were built on lies. You're jealous. You always have been. Jealous that Dad loved me more, that I was successful, that I got everything you wanted. I never wanted what you have, Vivian. I never wanted money bought with other people's suffering. I never wanted to be the kind of person who could evict families and sleep soundly at night. You sanctimonious bastard. You think you're so noble, so pure. You're just bitter and vindictive." "Maybe I am bitter, but I'm also right." She screamed obscenities at me before hanging up. It was the last time we ever spoke. The investigations took months. I continued my residency, finished my training, and began working as an attending physician at a community health clinic in East Portland, the same neighborhood my father had gentrified decades ago. I took a lower salary than I could have earned elsewhere, but the work was meaningful in ways that money couldn't measure. Uncle Raymond came to visit me at the clinic, beaming with pride as he watched me treat patients who couldn't afford care anywhere else. "Your father would have hated this," he said. "Good. You know what's funny? You're doing more good in this little clinic than he did with his entire fortune. You're actually helping people instead of exploiting them." The legal consequences for Vivian and Derek were severe. Derek was disbarred for his role in structuring fraudulent financing. Vivian faced multiple lawsuits and ultimately had to sell off most of the family's assets to settle claims. The Chen development empire collapsed, its properties sold at auction, its reputation destroyed. My mother, insulated by the trust fund Vivian had controlled, emerged relatively unscathed financially. But she was left alone, watching her children destroy each other, seeing the legacy her husband built crumble into scandal and disgrace. She never contacted me again. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved to Arizona, reinventing herself as someone with no connection to the Chen name. A year after the article ran, I received a letter from Rosa Delgado. Inside was a photo of a community center being built in East Portland, on land that had once been part of my father's development. "The lawsuits against your sister's company resulted in a settlement that's funding affordable housing and community spaces in the neighborhoods your father destroyed," she wrote. "Your courage in speaking out made this possible. Thank you for choosing what's right over what's easy." I pinned that letter to the wall in my clinic office, next to my medical degree. Every time I looked at it, I remembered why I'd done what I'd done, not for revenge, though there was certainly satisfaction in watching my father's corrupt empire fall, not for attention or vindication, but because some betrayals are so profound that silence becomes complicity. My father tried to erase me from his life and his legacy. Instead, I erased his legacy by exposing what it was truly built on. My sister tried to inherit his empire. Instead, she inherited his consequences. They thought family meant blind loyalty to wealth and image. I learned that real family means loyalty to truth and justice. I'm 32 years old now, still working at the community clinic, still treating patients who remind me why I became a doctor in the first place. I live in a small apartment, drive an old car, and carry student loan debt that will take years to pay off. By my father's standards, I'm a failure, the disappointing son who rejected everything he valued, but I sleep soundly at night. I look at myself in the mirror without shame. I know that the work I do matters, that the patients I treat are better off because I chose this path, and I know that somewhere, Dolores Martinez and all the others my father harmed are resting a little easier because someone finally held him accountable. The price of my inheritance was everything my father had accumulated, but the cost of staying silent would have been my soul. I chose to pay the price, and I'd make the same choice again. If you're reading this and you've been betrayed by the people who were supposed to love you, if you've been written out of someone's life because you refused to be what they wanted, I want you to know something. Your worth isn't determined by their judgment. Your value isn't measured by what they chose to give or withhold. You are not defined by their rejection. Stand up for what's right, even when it costs you everything, especially when it costs you everything, because some losses are actually gains. Losing my father's fortune gained me my integrity. Losing my family's approval gained me the respect of people who actually matter. Losing my inheritance gained me a legacy I can be proud of. In the end, the real inheritance my father left me wasn't money or property. It was a clear picture of who I never wanted to become, and that gift, bitter and painful as it was, made me into the person I am today. Choose truth over comfort. Choose justice over family loyalty when that loyalty demands complicity in wrongdoing. Choose the harder path if it's the right one. The price might be high, but the alternative, living with the knowledge that you stayed silent while others suffered, is infinitely higher. My name is Marcus Chen, and I'm a doctor, not a developer. I save lives instead of destroying communities. I help people instead of exploiting them, and I sleep at night knowing I did the right thing, even when the right thing cost me everything I was supposed to inherit. That's the story. That's the truth. And unlike my father's fortune, it's something no one can ever take away from me.